Hello and welcome to Rear Winging It, the Formula One podcast. I'm your host Ellie, and I'm joined by my co-host Kieran.
Hey Ellie, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, but unfortunately, we're without Harry this week.
We are.
He's been a bit of a numpty and locked himself out of his house, so he could not be present at the recording of this podcast.
He's pulled a Lance Stroll this week. Disaster class.
A disaster class indeed. And I wish I could say it was his first disaster class, but much like Lance Stroll, it was not. But we are here this week to talk about a race some people will regard as a disaster, and that is Monaco. Kieran, did you stay awake for the race? Did you doze off?
Oh, well, this was the first race this year we've actually watched together, I think, Ellie.
Yes.
So you were there to keep me entertained because, my lord, I needed some entertaining whilst watching what turned out to be a very boring race. I think I saw there was 2 on-track overtakes in the entire race.
I don't even remember seeing them, but I may have been napping at the time. they probably didn't cut to it. The 2 overtakes of the whole race, and the director didn't even cut to it, probably.
Sounds about right.
So there was obviously the big talk of the mandatory 2-stop strategy. We'll get into that in a minute, but first let's cast our mind to qualifying. So I mean, it's been like this for a few years now, but traditionally Monaco had a different schedule to the other races. It wasn't like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? There was a Thursday on the calendar, but alas, that tradition is no longer, and we're in line with the rest of the races, which I guess maybe that makes it fit a bit better in a triple header as this one is.
Especially
less of a tight turnaround, but
4-day turnaround's a bit ridiculous.
Yeah, the Mercedes, I don't think they turned up. I think they were still off enjoying themselves in Italy at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix because they didn't seem to turn up to qualifying.
Yeah, Kimi Antonelli must have got stuck behind in one of his classes from going home to Bologna, you know. They didn't let him out of school, so he couldn't make it to the race by the looks of it. He couldn't make it into Q2 at the very least, and neither could George, 14th and 15th. Not where we've expected him lately. They've been, Kimi's actually had a few weeks where he's not, let's not say struggled, but he's not quite been hitting Q3 each week. George, though, I think will be quite disappointed with P14.
Yeah, they definitely struggled, but last weekend they were also struggling a bit. So this has come back to back after, I know George has still had a very strong start to the season, but 2 weekends where they've maybe underperformed a bit. There's now only a handful of points separating the Mercedes, the Red Bull and the Ferraris, and considering how much better you would say the Mercedes has been than the Ferrari this season, it's only a few points, like 5 or so points that separate them. It doesn't seem as though it should be that few.
Yeah, it's not going into a European triple header. It's not really the time to lose a bit of form, right? So if this is like a little slump for them, it's hopefully they'll think that's all it is, a little slump. But yeah, the direction they're travelling in probably isn't the one they want to be travelling in at this point of the season. That's for sure. Especially
as the track at Imola and Monaco are very, very different circuits. So to struggle at one,
that's the most concerning bit.
Yeah, to struggle at one, you can kind of understand. The car just doesn't suit Monaco. It doesn't do well at the slow speeds. You can kind of understand that. But to struggle a bit at both is perhaps a bit concerning for them. Maybe other people are catching up, or maybe they've just had a dip. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we'll wait and see. I mean, I don't think they'll be having too many emergency meetings just yet after 2 races, but Spain next week, again, quite a different concept to Monaco. If they're struggling again, it might be a sign that their competitors are maybe caught up to them a bit with some of the upgrades they've bought. So one to watch, I think, next week.
Yeah. What I do find interesting is that we said last week this wasn't going to be a race that was particularly strong for the Red Bull, and we saw that Verstappen qualifying down in P15. But on the other hand, the racing bulls, the Visa Cash Up RBs, This was sort of a track that suited them. They did very well across the weekend.
Yeah.
It's interesting that at times the cars have been very, very, very similar. And we thought in the last few years, with all the rebrands, maybe they were coming back a bit more into the Red Bull. They were always in the family, but they were kind of becoming less of their own team and more the sister team. But it's interesting that they can have such contrasting fortunes. The Red Bull was still a bit quicker, but it's just the way it plays out was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the gap between the two cars has RB, I think, are doing better this year than last year, that's for sure. But, is the gap reduced due to Red Bull's performance, especially in that second seat, however it's been, with Tsunoda in there, or has RB really taken a step forward? I mean, Hajar in P6, Lawson in P9, that's very impressive for Monaco, I think. Two rookies in Q3, Hajar in 6th and 9th. Like, it's a really good result for them and something they can hopefully build on.
Yeah, especially when you consider Verstappen qualifying in P5 to have, the Racing Bulls in Q3 as well is fantastic result for them, I would say.
Yeah.
So
big time.
I wasn't expecting the Ferrari to be as close on pace with the Mercedes as they ended up being, because obviously Leclerc ended up splitting their McLarens. Do you think that's just like the home advantage,
Well, I don't know, because you've got Lewis, who's been struggling somewhat, coming in P4 as well. And I remember last week we were worried about Ferrari going into this week, that on qualifying at least they were really going to struggle, because they didn't even make it into Q3 last week, if I remember. So it's a big change. I mean, it's one of those things though, like having a car that works at Monaco is only good at Monaco. So, but hey, I mean, they'll take some plaudits for it, I think, for getting themselves right back in the mix, essentially. If they can maintain this for next weekend as well, maybe it does show more of a step forward. But obviously, Monaco being like such an outlier, it's hard to really like read too much into anything beyond it, really.
Yeah, I think you just have to discount it from, you can't take too much from the cars, because of, if a car performs well there, as you say, it might not perform well anywhere else. But Hamilton qualified well, but then he did get in trouble for impeding Verstappen.
He did. Yeah, I mean, slam dunk, really. It's just, I mean, Monaco, the size of the cars these days, it probably is quite tough when you've got 20 cars on track, or a lot of cars on track, to not be in the way. But still, I mean, it seems to be a bit of a growing, and we'll come on to the race later, but Lewis and his engineers have not seemed to be the happiest this year.
No.
Do you think it's just maybe it's teething issues, but
no, but
another sign that things aren't all rosy between driver and engineer.
Yeah, the way they communicate, I don't think is as effective. But then he was with Bono for so many years. You're not going to have that straight away with somebody new, somebody you've never necessarily worked with before. It takes time to build that kind of relationship and to understand what information he wants and at what part of the lap, and to know what feedback he wants. We speak about impeding, just to go back to the practice sessions with Lance Stroll. I don't know what he was doing, but
honestly, the moment with Leclerc, right? Just honestly, and got Lance Stroll big time this week.
They say in his ear, they say, "You've got Leclerc behind you," and then he just swings right out onto the racing line for absolutely no
right
reason.
Into the racing.
I mean, I know the wing mirrors are tiny, but if you're not going to use them, just take them off for the weight.
Yeah, well, if you're not going to listen to your race engineer, like, why have a radio in? Like, who knows? Who knows what's going through his head?
It was in practice, right? But had that have been in qualifying, it would have been a devastating
he would have gotten an
incident.
Well, it would have ruined Leclerc's weekend potentially,
yeah.
Especially in a race like Monaco where qualifying is so important, as we've said. Like, that could have ruined someone's race weekend right there. I don't think he got in much trouble for it. Maybe because it was a practice session. There's not much of a grid penalty they could have given out to him.
But then it costs the teams.
Yeah, it cost Ferrari money. It broke Leclerc's front wing.
Yeah, and
who's paying for that? I don't know.
Lance Stroll was out of practice after that, right? So, I mean, it obviously affected him as well, but in the cost cap era, if a driver is at fault for an incident, should the team be made to kind of pay for the repairs?
I think that's a slippery slope, though. I think that's a rabbit hole they probably don't want to go down because of where it ends with every single part having a price attached, and I don't know. I mean, in situations where it's that cut and dry, but then that's the thing, is like, who's at fault for which incident?
Where do you draw the line?
The fan bases in F1 are getting as toxic as it is. Like, we don't need to add on like, your team cost my team 25 grand.
yeah. Or they'll end up having like, wheel nuts costing thousands of pounds or something.
Yeah, they'll deliberate. They'll line the wheel nuts with gold so that every time a team hits them, it's going to cost that team a fortune to replace them. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's not the way to go. We'll go on to the race then. We've joked about it being a bit boring, but there was a lot to talk about. As you say, we were watching it together, and we were talking a lot about what we were watching. It was just a lot of frustration, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, a lot was made of the 2 mandatory pit stops and what it was going to do. I don't think anyone quite predicted the outcome. I mean, the biggest takeaway, I think, was the Williams strategy, the Racing Bull strategy, to essentially just be a moving bollard on the grid, on the track rather, to let your teammate get a pit stop. It's just a bit farcical, really, wasn't it? I don't know. Yeah. There wasn't much to enjoy really with that. It was interesting, it was something I've never seen in F1 before, so maybe that's a positive, but not really something I want to see again, if I'm being honest.
And the people involved with it, Williams did the strategy, and I know they came in 9th and 10th. They perhaps, would have wanted more if it were a race where they could have overtaken, but they finished 9th and 10th, and they were able to orchestrate the race the way they wanted. They were able to hold people up, get their pit stops. Albon was able to pit stop twice. Sainz was able to pit stop twice. Then at the end they swapped back, right? They swapped Albon back in front of Sainz with team orders. So it worked. Yep. It worked for them, and it worked for the Racing Bulls as well. But James Vowles, they were talking to Sky, on the pit wall, and he said, "This is not how I like to go racing." And I think that's a sentiment that all of us fans share.
I don't know where I heard it. I think he actually, during the race, texted Toto saying, "I'm sorry about this."
Well, there was definitely...
he literally texted Toto being like, "Sorry." So no, even the teams doing it weren't seemingly happy about it. But I mean, if there's an advantage to be gained from it, a team is going to do it if they're happy about it or not, right?
Yeah, you're not. If you don't do it, you disadvantage yourself. So obviously they are going to do it. But I don't think Toto was particularly happy with James Vowles. But what was James Vowles to do if he hadn't have done it and disadvantaged his team? Okay, it might have been great for the sport, but that's not how you go about your job, is it?
No, at the end of the day, they're on the grid 10th and 11th, and they finished 9th and 10th, which at Monaco, that's a great weekend. That's a great job from qualifying to race. So you can't really knock the results in that sense. Yeah,
we saw another... I mean, the Mercedes were a bit odd of a strategy this weekend. I know that they just got stuck behind, but I don't know what was said to George, or if George kind of took it on himself.
Yeah.
At the chicane to go straight over. When Antonelli did it...
it was funny, though.
Yeah, it was funny. Antonelli did it and gave the place back, because I think they said to him, George has been given quite a significant penalty here. But I don't know if they said something to him, but he definitely came on the radio afterwards and said, I had to do it, I'll take the penalty.
Yeah.
But...
Yeah, I mean, I think he was... in a way, was kind of vindicated, because the time he lost with the drive-through penalty was less than what he gained by having some free air to drive into. So I'm not sure if it actually increased his grid position, really.
No, well, he still finished behind.
It was hard to really keep...
He still finished behind.
He still ended up finishing behind him because he had to do those pit stops. But then if he hadn't have done that and got some time in that clean air, he would have then had to pit. I mean, it's his fault he hadn't pit, I suppose, but he would have then had to pit, putting him even further back. But it's just weird we have to talk like this, right? Like, there's not a single overtake. Like we said, apparently there was 2 according to the stats, but I can't remember a single overtake. Like, it's weird we have to talk like this, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And especially at, like, one of the, you know, Triple Crown events, you know, the crown in the jewel of the Formula 1 calendar, as people talk about it like that, as if we're racing 50 years ago. But unfortunately, the modern cars don't really work for this circuit. But back on the penalty, I think it was the right decision. I know it was harsh.
I agree.
But I think it set the precedent. And if you break the rules, but you don't intend to, then I think the penalty is one thing. But if you break the rule intentionally, you have to have a more severe penalty. Yeah, I mean, apparently, like, in the driver's briefing, they were told, if you do this, because the chicane is almost the only place on the track you even could go off track. It's the only bit of track that you can go off track. I think there was a thing in the driver's briefing, they were told, you will be punished for this if you do it. So they were, in a way, warned beforehand that if you do this, we're not just going to give you 5 seconds, it's going to be a punishment. Maybe they didn't expect it to be as egregious as what George did. Yeah. And then he come on the radio saying that Albon was, you know, braking on the straights and that was dangerous. And maybe it was, maybe there was an element of dangerous driving from Albon.
But I think he's always going to come out and say something like that, isn't
he? Yeah.
You know.
But even towards the end of the race, when we had Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, and then Oscar Piastri in the last few laps as well, they were all within DRS of one another. There wasn't that exciting, what's going to happen?
No,
how's this race going to end? It was very flat and very processional, as Monaco always is, but this race had the added, we're trying to do something different, and they kind of almost felt worse.
It kind of exposed it more, but like it's almost for years been like the unspoken like, well, not secret, you know, the unspoken obvious secret of F1 is that Monaco is extremely boring, and by adding the 2-stop strategy, they said it out loud for the first time, I think, saying, okay, Monaco is boring, and then it didn't fix it, so they basically just said Monaco is boring and didn't fix it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it just drew attention to it even worse than most years, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, I don't know, I think having like a mandatory 2-stop doesn't work when there were drivers who were going, you know, was it Antonelli went like 70 laps before pitting out of the 78 or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, he was proving that those hard tyres, I think he was on the hard tyres, could last the whole race. So
whole race easily.
It would have made more sense to have had compounds that couldn't last. I don't know if they were the softest.
Yeah, but they were the 3 softest compounds. They couldn't. It just doesn't, Monaco. It just doesn't fit in F1. You know, they can't, because obviously you can't make tires just for Monaco. You can't, you know, make the cars smaller just for Monaco. So it's just shoehorned in for tradition, which, you know, maybe there's merit in that. I don't know, but I think you just have to admit that the way F1 works this year, like, you know, next year the cars are going to start moving in the direction of being smaller and lighter. But this year, and the way the cars have got bigger and bigger, I don't know. You know, I don't know what you expect. It's just, it's not going to get better until the cars change.
Yeah.
And if you're changing the cars just for Monaco, they're not going to do that. So it's kind of a weird position it's put in.
I think in the recent times the cars have got much bigger and much heavier, but they have also got much quicker because Lando Norris in qualifying set a lap record. But if all the cars are going at roughly the same speed, you don't think, oh, they're going 10 miles an hour slower.
No,
because you know,
it's
it looks quick and they're all going a similar pace. It's if they were all, you know, 10 miles an hour slower, and then, you know, the races had a few less laps to accommodate that.
Yeah.
But the racing was closer, we would all prefer that.
Well, look at like something like Formula E, where the cars are nowhere near as fast, but they're actually quite a lot smaller. And Monaco, I watched it it was on a few weeks ago. It was a very interesting race, you know. there was enough room for overtakes. It was genuinely interesting because there's intrigue, because there isn't a chance to overtake. Whereas you know the cars could be going at 700 miles an hour, but if there's no overtaking, it's only interesting to a point.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It's not. You know, we're not IndyCar fans for a reason, right? Going around in circles.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the drivers seem to be more interested in the Indy 500 this weekend than in Monaco, which says quite a lot about the Triple Crown, as it is. I believe the Indy 500 is one of the jewels in it, and perhaps
is it Le Mans, the other one?
So I guess what they're saying is that the American part of it might be more interesting than the Formula One part of it.
Yeah. Well, Alonso's been one away for a while, right? He's tried in the Indy 500, didn't win it obviously the time he tried, but I don't think any other F1 driver's close, really.
No, I don't think so.
Because to have won Monaco, you've got to be quite rarefied air to have won Monaco in the first place, let alone then make it to a Le Mans team that wins.
Well, on the grid at the moment, there'd only be 3, right? And now Norris as well. So Hamilton, Verstappen, Alonso. I am the ones.
Yeah, because Perez won it. He's not here anymore.
Ricciardo won it. He's not there anymore.
Ricciardo won it.
So
yeah, I'm pretty sure Rosberg won it back in the day. I'm going way back then, but
nobody. there's only 4 now on the grid who have won Monaco. So yeah, as you say, you got to be pretty special. I mean, 3 of them are world champions. So yeah, Lando will be happy to join that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on Lando though, like, you know, the job at Monaco is qualifying, and he did the job. To be fair to him, you know, I think a lot has been spoken about like we have now actually about the quality of the race itself, but he should be I think he can hold his head high and on a great weekend for him.
Yeah, he did everything he needed to do.
He kept everyone behind. Yeah, he did everything he needed to. Didn't panic when, you know, Max didn't pit until right at the end, which I think was a gamble that was worth
definitely.
it for Red Bull, to be honest.
He had the gap to Hamilton. If a red flag came in, he would have won the race, but it didn't, and he finished where he would have finished anyway. So I think it was very much worth it. Yeah. It was risk free almost. But
I did get Lando's point where he said, like, after the race, he said it's kind of silly that it created that situation that Max was just gambling on a red flag. And if it happened, he would have won through luck. I mean, you know, strategy to a point, because they left him out there hoping for it to happen, so it would have been their choice. But yeah, like, you know, him winning through a lucky red flag or something like that, it would have felt a bit farcical. That would have felt farcical,
especially having it be mandatory 2 stops, and yet one of your stops could be achieved under a red flag in Monaco, where if there's a big crash, it has to be red flagged because there's no way to get round it.
Yeah, that's a good point. On a track like Monaco, it's borderline guaranteed a red flag. If
I mean, there was an incident, but was it Gasly?
Yeah, Gasly driving his car halfway around the track with no brakes, because that was going into the chicane, right? And he just kept going all the way around, despite announcing on the radio he couldn't brake.
And then he had to be caught by
I think
it was the Williams team caught him in the pit lane because he couldn't slow down to get into the Alpine one.
Yeah, he couldn't slow down.
Yeah, which must be quite scary. But
yeah, I'm surprised he didn't get in more trouble about that, to be fair, because it probably wasn't the safest thing he could have done.
No, but then I guess if there's not as many places to stop.
Yeah. Well, someone who did have to come to a stop was our unluckiest man in F1 these days, Fernando Alonso.
Yeah, bless him.
Another mechanical. We've been having more. I mean, we're not had tons of mechanicals, but there's been another mechanical.
And Mercedes
again this week. Yeah.
Power unit. Also, to correct something we were speaking about on a previous episode, we were saying that the next year, I don't know if we already corrected it, but next year we were talking about how Mercedes are going to have, people were expecting Mercedes to have the best engine, and we were saying that Aston Martin are going to be in the Mercedes, but they're in a Honda, aren't they? So we were
they're not
completely off pace. So they won't care.
Top quality research done. Well, we'll blame the research department for that one. Someone's going to get sacked.
Harry. He's not here.
We lied about the lockout. He's actually been sacked for his bad research. No, I'm joking.
Yeah. Well, hey, if he's still locked out, you won't be able to listen to it, so it doesn't matter what we say. But yeah, a lot of issues with the cars. Not a lot, but more than we've had in other seasons. So it's interesting to note, to see where it goes. Because at the moment, it's not affected any of the top people, but that's what we saw when Rosberg won in 2016. The reason he won was Hamilton had like 6 DNFs or something ridiculous from...
Yeah, and in a season like this, if we are going to see some mechanical DNFs, it will decide the championship amongst the our established top 3, as I say.
There's only 3 points now.
A couple of DNFs could swing it.
There's 3 points now between Piastri and Lando. After, obviously, Lando's great qualifying and also Leclerc managing to separate them. It did Lando a favour having that buffer there, because first and second is a 7-point swing, but first and third is 10 points or whatever, more than that, 10 points.
Yeah, I think
10 points.
I think it goes 25, 18, 15 to a 10-point swing.
So that's then a big swing. So 3 points is barely anything. 3 points is first and second, or second and third.
No, I think next week, because odds are next week, whichever one of them finishes ahead of the other will take the lead of the championship. You know, Lando will probably be 3 points further ahead than Piastri. I think next week's really important. Just, it's still quite early in the season with so many races, but I think momentum-wise, end of the triple header, I think next week momentum-wise is so important for either of those drivers to be on the top step in the McLaren garage. Yeah,
because I don't think McLaren are necessarily going to choose an out-and-out number one, because they say they're not going to.
No, I don't think they are.
But if one of them pulled significantly ahead, then conversations would have to be had. If we get to halfway and Oscar were, if this result went the other way round, Oscar could have been, 23 points up as opposed to 3 if they were just switched around. And then, if that trend carries on for another few races and you're looking at like a 50-point gap or whatever, then you almost do have to prioritise one.
Yeah, it crystallizes their positions a bit, right?
Yeah. But Lando did say he was happy to have his Saturday pace back, because he's always been a good qualifier, and this year he's been out qualified a bit more than we would have expected. So maybe this is what he needed to kick on. Yeah,
but winning, getting on pole, as it were, in Monaco is probably one of the biggest confidence boosters you can have on your Saturday pace, right?
Yeah, definitely. Especially when you beat out Piastri, who's had such excellent qualifying form this season, and to beat him by a reasonable margin. It wasn't like 100th or whatever. It was a bit bigger. So Lando was definitely the dominant McLaren this weekend, but. We're heading into Mexico. We're heading into Barcelona next week.
Mexico.
Several months down the line there. We're heading into Barcelona next week, which might not suit the McLaren car as much. And I think when the track doesn't suit the car as much, there are races where Piastri maybe has done a bit better.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah, I think Piastri, just from the nature of the way they've talked in the media this year, Piastri does seem to be a bit more comfortable in the car and can probably deal with it when it's not absolutely perfect for that track that weekend. Whereas, again, he's second in the championship by 3 points, so I don't want to overstate it, but Norris has maybe not seemed as comfortable when the car isn't at its absolute best. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think it will take a bout of confidence into next week, which will only do the championship fight well. So that's what I'm happy about.
Should we go to our driver of the day?
Let's.
Off you go. Yeah.
Shall I go first? Cool. I think in a race such as that, where no one did anything spectacular in terms of overtaking anybody, I think my driver of the weekend, just for how funny they've been, has got to go to George Russell. Watching him go forward straight onto that chicane, it was just funny. It was just objectively funny, to be honest. And his reaction in the cool down interview and things, his suggestions for the drivers all have a button to turn the sprinklers on at any point. It was just comedy gold. You could tell he was just so frustrated with how the weekend had gone that he just didn't care anymore, and it was very funny all weekend. So I'm going to give it to George Russell. Just a bit.
Well, I'll do the more serious one, and I'll say Lando on account of it was a good race, as good as a race as you need. You know, he did the job.
That's a good point. There's nothing more he could have or needed to do.
Exactly. We'll go to grid news. Russell paper sound. Hello and welcome to grid news. So, of course, we've mentioned already the two-stop being mandatory. It didn't really work. But as Kieran did touch on, the reaction from some of the drivers has been quite funny. And our regular listeners to our podcast will know me and Harry speak often of putting sprinklers on the circuits. And George Russell, he may have had a listen. We don't know. Do you think he's our biggest fan, Kieran?
We don't know. He could be.
He could be. But I think he was just trying to highlight how when you make the pit stops mandatory, but only at this race, you're already making the racing somewhat artificial. So it's not actually that much more ridiculous to say, why don't we just turn the sprinklers on?
Yeah. If you're going to artificially engineer the race, go the whole hog. I think maybe with rain, it makes it, or sprinklers, it makes it less safe. So maybe that's a harder sell.
Yeah, I reckon.
You know, maybe that's
yeah. If we pitch it to Saudi Arabia, I reckon they'll be up there cloud seeding in a heartbeat if we could make their races more interesting. To be fair, that Saudi Arabia track in the rain would kill
true.
someone.
I don't think. Well, I say it's already dangerous.
But
But I think what was interesting was that even the team principals came in, and kind of all agreed for once, which is very rare.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think Toto was like, we tried it didn't work. Andrea Stella was like, the change in the cars will make it possible, but here it's like impossible. You can be 3 seconds faster and it doesn't work. You know, there's just not space to brake. And Fred was going on about, or rather Toto Wolff was talking about preventing teams backing up the way that Albon did. But it's something we touched on now, is like, how do you, I think we spoke about it when we actually watched Grand Prix, is like, how would you police it if you had a minimum lap time? What would the minimum lap time be? Like, you're not allowed to go slow. No one wants to go slow, but it's just questions we shouldn't have to have about F1,
again,
really.
If you impose a minimum lap time, it's again making the race artificial, and the more we tamper with it, and the more scripted almost the race becomes, I think the less enjoyment we get from it. Because already we have a one-stop change of compound mandatory, but when it's like that across the board, you get used to it and you stop thinking of it as, you think of it just as another bit of the regulation. You know, in the same way that we think of DRS as just another bit of the regulation, as opposed to being something that's scripted to make the racing more interesting, which is what they are there for. But we stop to when it's at every race, and it's normal. But when you try and just manipulate one race on the calendar, it just seems so unnatural.
I mean, I think we go back to the point, I think I say it every year, I'm not a fan of Monaco. I get it's historic, I just don't think we need it anymore. I don't think that's don't know if that's a popular opinion or not these days. I think amongst our age group it's probably quite popular. Amongst the oldies probably like it for the nostalgia point, but in 10 years time, where will the nostalgia come from? Because I won't be able to think, oh yeah, that great Monaco race, because there won't have been a great Monaco race, because it doesn't work. You know, The nostalgia like, if there's no good racing, the
That is
nostalgia dies.
That is a good way of saying it. But I do think...
Yeah. If you end it now, you crystallise it as a great track that we used to have. If we keep going and going, you're just going to ruin its legacy.
And you dilute what makes it special. That's a good question. Is Monaco now winning Monaco? Do you think it means less? Do you think it's less special for the drivers than it was 30, 40 years ago?
I don't know, but I think for the drivers, as pure, you can't get a bigger motorsport fan than an F1 driver. I think for them, it's always going to mean something, and then caveat to, on the opposite of what I just said, it is a great test of, where your line is. How close to the curb do you want to get? How close to the wall do you want to get? How fast can you be compared to your fellow teammates, fellow racers? So I think they're always going to get enjoyment out of that to an extent. But then you have someone like Hadjar, again, maybe one of the younger guys, the newer generation, who said he felt like falling asleep at times in the race. So I think again, like if the racing is that boring, the tide will turn soon enough.
I do agree with that, but I'm also one of the more of a purist. I don't like the change.
You are a 50-year-old man at heart, as everyone knows.
Everybody thinks I'm like a really old soul, I'm an old soul.
Old soul. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't like change.
You'd hear after a couple of gin and tonics, horribly racist. That's a joke,
true.
Obviously, for the listener.
I don't know what I was going to say. You've distracted me now. What I was going to say is that
Sorry.
I think if we change too much about the sport, we lose the soul of the sport.
It's like VAR in football, Why change
something? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That is a life lesson for us all. But I do think Formula One at the moment.
Well, it's on an honest point. It's like the Champions League. Why change the format? It was perfect.
Hey, Kieran's not complaining that they changed the Europa League format.
No,
definitely not.
Definitely not. Champion.
See, I had promised Harry that he was going to be allowed to speak about West Ham this week. So all we will say is that Spurs are better than West Ham. So there we go. You can't see his piece. Take that, Paolo. We'll go to a preview for Spain. I think personally, this race, I said it already, I think that the Red Bull is going to be a bit better here. So I'm going to go for my top three is going to be Verstappen, Piastri, Norris. In that order. But I'm just hoping there's like at least 3 overtakes.
Yeah, there should be. Well, the thing with Spain is, I think when they reprofiled the track not too long ago and they got rid of the chicane to make it a long sweeping corner, it just took away an overtaking opportunity there, which I think, I don't know, I'm going off topic now, I'm just supposed to give my preview, but similar to Australia, I think when tracks overthink it and say faster is better, actually it's the long hard stop at the end of a straight that creates overtakes. And I think Barca lost a little bit of that, which is a shame. But I mean, I haven't got to worry about it anymore.
Well, there's rumours they're both going to be. Anyway, they're both on the 2026, I believe.
Oh,
but I don't know in the future.
God, we really need to fire.
Well, I don't know in the future if they're both going to be on the grid because on the calendar. Because as I said, they are not going to be having Imola because they don't think that they can have 2 in the same country. We need we at least 7 in America.
You definitely should have 2 in Spain, yeah.
But yeah, if they can't fit in 2 in Italy, I doubt they'll be able to fit 2 in Spain.
No. Right, sorry, distract us. My top 3 in Spain then. I still think we're going to get a McLaren win. I think just the interplay with having 2 teammates at the top versus one by himself, it plays out differently each week. But I will say my winner going to be Piastri. Put his foot down, gain a bit of ground at the top of the championship after Norris closed the gap down. Then Verstappen, then Norris.
Yeah.
My top 3. And I expect a better. I won't put them anywhere, but I expect a better weekend for Mercedes this week as well.
I think they really need to bounce back, don't they?
I hope anyway.
Yeah. I will go on to my final thought, and I will say my final thought is this. When Harry is not here, you really notice how much less time we speak talking about Verstappen and Red Bull. So...
Well, I think we haven't really spoke about any individual drivers that much this week.
Yeah, we've just...
More about the race itself, just because
there wasn't really that much to talk about and that much to pick out and say, ooh. You know, we said Hadjo had a good race. Other than that, I don't really... Like, there wasn't any, like, standout people. There was people who did worse than we thought, and there were people who did a little bit better than we thought, but there was nobody that I thought, wow. So, that's my final thought. We've not really spoken about anybody. Maybe we're just bad at our jobs.
Yeah, maybe. This might be our worst ever episode.
We need Harry back. Get your keys back soon.
Yeah, my final thought. My final thought is that I hope Harry gets back into his house okay, and we miss you. That's my final thought. A wholesome note upon which to end a torrid weekend for F1, in my opinion.
Yeah, let's hope we're back to better. Back
to our best next week.
That's all we can hope for.
Back to full strength, back to the three of us, back to better racing.
Yeah. So thank you, Kieran, for joining me, and thank you for not getting locked out of your house. Thank you to Harry for his spirit working its way through us. And thank you to our lovely listeners for sticking with us. If you watched the whole race, I'm sorry. And if you've listened to this whole episode, I'm sorry. But thank you. We shall see you next week on... We shall see you next week on Real Winging It, the Formula 1 podcast. Goodbye.
Goodbye.